Hey, hello everyone out there on the internet, YouTube, Facebook, and now also, God help us all, Twitch, or not Twitch, X, aka Twitter. I think its official name is X, formerly known as Twitter or Zitter or whatever the heck you call it. But we're streaming on that too, and let's see how this all goes. Anyway, guys, welcome. I'm Pete Bickford. This is the ComicBase Livestream. We're doing something a little different today. We're doing our spooky Halloween show, and we're going to transform from an informative comic book, software programs, Q&A live stream into a little murder mystery, only in the murders in the building, true crime kind of show tonight. So we'll get onto that one in just a minute. First of all, let's say hi to the folks who are here. Appreciate all y'all. If you do have comments that you ever want to send to any of our live streams, please put them into the comments at ComicBase TV. I will get to them as much as I can. But today, let's get on with the spooky business, and we'll get down to it. So let me set the scene for you just a little bit. It's July 13th, 1990, and very much a more innocent time. It's Friday the 13th, but a young Pete Bickford at that time, who was working his first year at Apple. He had just gotten his loan-to-own Mac 2 computer, which is had a fabulous 2 megabytes. That's megabytes of RAM in it, which I actually had to go around to a guy around the backside of a building, paying him $350 for the extra megabyte to make it so I could run more than one program at once. I'd left college, in Wisconsin. I was now living out in California, and I'd just gotten back into comic books myself, and I was starting to use a program called Excel to keep track of all of them, and I would print them up, and I could use the laser writers at work and print them up into a nice 3-ring bound volume. It's a Pete's Comic Collection on it, which is around in my bookshelf someplace, but it was all those things. Back out in the comic world, meanwhile, Amazing Spider-Man number 338 had just dropped. Let's throw some graphics up here so we can illustrate our little adventure as we go along. Battle Royale against the Sinister Six. The epitome of all things comic pricing. This was the Overstreet Comic Book Price Guide. Volume 20 had just dropped on this one. Celebrating their big one there. A nice JLA cover there. Over in a little town called a little town outside of Detroit, was in the Clinton Township in Michigan, was a shop called Comics World. Here's a bad picture of it right now. It's very difficult to find a contemporary photo of it back at the time, but this is the best I could come up with from a little Dateline special, that they ran on this little event. So this was a weird day at the comic shop. Let me go ahead and switch back to my own camera here, because I got a story to tell y'all. So over at the comics, over at Comics World here, this is a little strip mall comic store. Nothing special. It's like one of these things, a very narrow entranceway in front. Pretty deep shop, all things considered, but not particularly wide. Comics piled up all around. Lots of plastic containers up by the register to keep people's pull and hold lists and everything. It's a couple of copies of X-Men, on the back wall under glass. Probably fetching amazingly high prices, like maybe even like $50 if they had a copy of X-Men 94 at the time. But pretty much very much your standard suburban comic shop. Nothing particularly fancy going on. It was unmanned for the time. It was let's put our time right around 6:15 p.m. or at least a minute or two before, and a couple of called Tom and Lenora Ward, who had been walking around at night, and they were stopping at the shop. There was going to be some excitement there. There was going to be a party later on that day, but as was their wont, they stopped in the shop, thumbed around a little bit, found a couple issues they're interested in getting, and they're wondering, well, where the heck is the people at the register? I mean, this is a comic shop, so it's not like it's really uncommon for there not to be people around. They could be busy in the back, they could be going to the bathroom, they could be doing whatever else, because it's typically only a couple folks going on. But there were a couple of teenagers in the store as well, and they were getting antsy to pay. And eventually they were like, well, geez, all right, fine, we'll be rude. We'll go into the back and see what's going on. And they walked to the back of the store, and there, amidst a bunch of plastic, containers that they were using to, sort and do various bits and down there was a body on the ground. And the body was that of Barbara George, the, one of the co-owners of the shop. She owned it with her husband, Michael. laying down, unresponsive, as we'd say in the EMR trade. Basically, the body, she was warm, she was not breathing, she would not respond to any kind of light, touch, talk, anything else like that. Um, Luckily for her, you could say Lenora Ward was actually a nurse and immediately went and started CPR. Well, she went and notified the rest of the folks to call 911. Help arrived very shortly, but despite Lenora's efforts with get to restore breathing or anything else like that, nothing happened. And within 15 minutes of being transported to the hospital, Barbara George was declared dead. Now, this is about where the story actually starts, because the real thought at the time was that, well, she must have fallen, hit her head on something, maybe had a heart attack. She's a young woman; she's only 32 years old, but these things happen. It was a crowded shop. There were a lot of people knocking about, especially when they had to get the stretcher into the back to, come, and try to get her, get her out through the whole place. And they might have knocked over a few containers, things like that. But it wasn't like it was piled high with sharp objects or anything else like that. But the nurse that was cleaning up the now deceased woman's body, noticed that blood had pooled down towards the back of her head, and she noticed a very small hole, the kind of hole that would be made by a small caliber bullet. And at that point, it took a turn for the strange, because it's now only about 7 o'clock, and you now got a murder on your hands. So around that time, other people have been milling around the shop doing various things. Police lines have been set up. The whole place was cordoned off with police tape. And around 8 o'clock, specifically 8:15, according to his testimony, Michael George appeared on the scene. He's very surprised. He was expecting that there was going to be an event at the shop he was meant to attend. It wasn't exactly sure what it was, but let's face it, everyone in the neighborhood kind of knew that it was going to be a surprise party his wife was throwing for him that night. He showed up on the scene, and the policeman said, "Sir, are you Michael George?" He says, "Yes." And they said, "I'm sorry, terribly sorry, sir. Your wife has been, horribly injured. Could you please, come with us? Tell us what you've been doing." He says, "Well, I've been sleeping at my mom's house. I just took a nap, and I just got here. I guess my wife must have hit her head on something. Did she was she in the back? Did she hit her head and so forth?" Which was curious, because the detective hadn't said anything about it being in the back or that she'd hit her head or anything else like that. They said, "Please come with me, sir. We have to go to the hospital." And then they, showed him his wife, and he said, "I'm sorry, your wife is dead." And at that point, Michael didn't show a lot of reaction. Now, people do react in different manners. When you get amazingly awful news like this, some people just shut down. Some people fall into a ball weeping, but Michael showed very little response whatsoever, which the detectives thought was odd. And anyway, they investigated through the night. At that point, it was clear that she had been shot. And I think about 6 hours later, after they'd gone in and they'd videotaped the different, parts of the which is now, I guess the crime scene, looked something like this. If I can get a graphic up. Here's the front counter. This is Exhibit 11. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get any really good documentary photos of the whole thing, so I did what I could. But after they, this is a image transferred off of the Clinton Township. Clinton Township is a place of only about 90,000 people back then. And they did not have a very big police department. It was not CSI. They weren't going to be doing any, whiz bang things to solve crimes of the whole thing. But they were trying to do their best with the police work. They went and they photographed the whole thing. They said, "Sir, there's been some signs of disturbance. We think that, possibly, your wife may have been, in a struggle, maybe. Is that how the things get knocked over in the back there?" People wondered, well, maybe it was the EMS that had knocked it over, getting the stretcher in and out and so forth. They weren't really sure, but if you did see pictures of it, you just basically see a bunch of little plastic containers, the sort of things that you'd buy at like the dollar store, for sorting things, had been knocked around the back. There was a bit of a mess, but nothing particularly noteworthy to my eye, at least. They said, "Well, sir, could you look around and see if anything's been stolen?" And Michael looked at the case in the front, where if you go back to the graphic over here, you see, if you really, if you zoom in there, you can see he's got a copy of, Some X-Men, some other things like that. The sort of thing that back in 1990 wouldn't have been amazing. Unfortunately, in 2024, it'd all be CGC'd up the butt, and we'd be, it would be like, absolutely out of reach and so forth. But back then, not particularly expensive books. But Michael pretty quickly did say, well, I did notice that I had 2 boxes of comic books. He actually came back right away with this. There's 2 boxes of really expensive comics I had back there. Golden Age stuff, really, really valuable stuff. That's all missing. And so, well, sir, can you go and make us a list of those? And he took some time and he actually made a list. I saw the list. It's a bunch of handwritten pages. Remember, this is back in the early times, the brutal prehistoric times. This is back before, as we say, ComicBase. So the poor guy had gone and handwritten what he had of the list of pages he had. He said he had a copy of Action Number 6, First Appearance of Jimmy Olsen. That was his big book out of the list. He rated as $2,200 in near mint to mint, which would be quite a thing to see, actually. But other than that, a bunch of stuff that's like $75, things like that. But he totaled up the list and he came up with a number like $12,600 worth of stolen comic books. And so the working theory at that time is, well, it must have been a robbery gone wrong. But then the medical examiner came in, and things were a little strange on that one. There's only been, well, they found that 2 shots had been fired. One shot in the back room had been fired into the eye of a Kathy Ireland poster, swimsuit poster. It was just, again, a very small hole. As it turns out, they looked at it and they thought it might be a 38, which is a tiny bullet. It's a bullet about this big. Let's see if I can show it like this. So about, imagine, just the entire cartridge is a little over an inch. The point of the bullet is about 3/8 of an inch, actually a little less than 3/8 of an inch in diameter. The sort of thing that apparently you could fire into, as it turned out, the top of your skull from right overhead, and it would not penetrate out the other side. It was just, that's why there wasn't very much blood. It stopped her heart instantly, and the bullet had been lodged inside, and so they didn't know immediately that it was a shooting. But the second bullet, which had been fired into the Kathy Ireland, swimsuit, poster calendar, there was no immediate explaining of that, and there was an explanation offered later, but we'll get to that one in a bit. So, by the way, let's take a brief break here while I wet my whistle here. And also say hi to everyone who's in there. We have Greg Hecht in the house, Brian Price, Mike Beam, Jet City Comics, Department of Comics, Xanadu Comics, etc. Welcome to the show. Like I say, we're doing a little bit of only murders in the comic store sort of episode today. So, welcome to the first ever true crime podcast of ComicBase Livestream. So, hope you enjoy the show. All right. So, anyway, at that point, they had wondered what else is going on. Strangely, as they're in the middle of doing the crime scene, police cars everywhere, crime tape everywhere, people milling around and so forth. There were guests arriving because the guests had been expected for Barbara's, party for her husband for his 30th birthday. Michael George had actually been, he was 30 years old that day, but he had opened up his first comic store when he was only 23, and he'd opened a number of stores. But then Comics World was just one of a few that he'd done at that point. So he'd actually been very successful in the whole comics business. He'd met and married his wife Barbara a couple of years earlier. They had 2 children by then, and as he told the homicide detectives, and this is where you could say it's a small town police force, but any cop anywhere knows 2 things in his heart. They know that if a restaurant burns down, it was arson. And they know that if a wife gets shot or your wife ends up murdered, that the husband did it, and it's as true as anything else that you will ever learn on the job as a cop, I hear. So they're looking at the husband, and they're looking at him very carefully. This guy who's strangely affectless, who is happy to go into great detail about the comics he lost, but is not really getting worked out about his dead wife. And they ask him, "Well, sir, how's the marriage been? Good?" And he says, "Oh yeah, all good. things were great. No problems in the marriage. No. Boyfriends, girlfriends. No. None of that stuff. No, we were all happy. She's going to throw me a party tonight. And after that, we were actually going to be slipping away for a romantic weekend. The parents were going to take the kids, and then we were going to slip over and have some time to ourselves at long last, after a long day's work in the comic store. And, it was going to be nice. But now, sadly, all that's ruined. Well, days went on. And these things never work as fast as you really see them on TV. In real life, things take a while to assemble, and you can have suspicions, but nothing's any good without proof. But then things started just getting a little weird in the days ahead. So one of the things that was weird is people started dropping hints to the police about saying, yeah, Michael and Barbara weren't that happy. Well, why do you say that, ma'am? Well, I work at the nail salon down the 2 doors down from them. There was actually an empty, space between them, which will come up in just a moment. But down at the nail salon, they said, look, we could hear them through the walls fighting. Matter of fact, there'd been a really, really bad fight at about 2:30 that day, but we heard them fighting like 30 times in the last month or two. That we can think of. It was really disruptive. They were clearly having a really bad time in their marriage. And this was confirmed by talking to the brother of the now dead woman. He said, they were really going through a rough patch, but Barbara was Polish Catholic, and divorce was out of the question. And so they were just going to have to work it out, and that's why they'd arranged with the parents to again help them paper over the whole thing, give them a romantic weekend ahead, and move on from that. But then they got another bit of information dropped on them. Someone said, hey, have a look at that Renee girl who's working at the shop. She's a new woman that was hired on. Her name was Renee Kotula. She'd just been divorced just about 3 weeks earlier. She'd had 5 children of her own, but they'd had a very bad marriage. And Barbara had befriended her and actually said, well, hey, why don't you come work at the shop? And the detectives noticed in the days after the funeral and so forth that Renee and him were seemingly to be inseparable. Renee and Michael. And matter of fact, the brother of the now dead woman had actually stopped on over at Michael's house to comfort him at one point, 3 weeks on, later on, and actually found the two of them kissing. So that was unexpected, but it's stressful times. Maybe it's just one of those things, that people just fall into each other's arms when things are very, very tragic and very down. But as things turned out and people started spreading more stories around the thing, other people started coming out of the woodwork. There was a woman who had testified later on that let me see if I can get her name right now. Teresa, but I don't have the last name with me right now, actually, testified that when they're at the viewing for the body, he's wearing, that Michael was wearing dark sunglasses, completely, affect free. She described it as looking like the sort of thing that Stevie Wonder would wear. And he basically had been coming on to her in different times as she was in the shop with her son. He had passed her notes, trying to get her to call her and have dinner and things like that. And he basically came up to her, just at the viewing. She's looking over her shoulder at the casket, and he's essentially giving her what me and Carolyn would call an overhug. With the sort of thing was like, it's a little too chummy. That makes you want to say back off. And then later on, they found out that there might have even been other people, but more on that later. Now, the bullet that had been fired into the Kathy Ireland, swimsuit calendar had actually penetrated the wall. They found it lodged, splintered up, of course, in the vacant drywall of the adjoining building. It was nobody renting in that part right there, but that was just an odd thing to do, and there were theories as to why anyone would fire into a wall like that, but they would present those later on. So it seemed that this guy might be dirty, but they couldn't find a gun. there was no real DNA evidence to be had. I mean, you could fingerprint all over the place, but you're just going to find lots and lots of comic employees' fingerprints, Barbara and George's, fingerprints. But then they own the place; they work back there. Nothing unusual about that. Michael had a key to the back room. It was a bit in disorder. There was a missing box of comics or two, depending on according to his testimony. None of the other employees seemed to think that anything was missing, not even the comic geeky ones, but he swore that that the comics had gone missing, and it was quite a lot of money. It was $12,600 at the time, which would be about $30,000 worth today. So it was worth noting about the whole thing. But robbery gone wrong was the official idea of what had gone on. But there was no real evidence, and in addition to that, a number of strange things had happened earlier that day, which set people on edge and maybe made them think maybe it wasn't just the husband doing this one. So let's back the time up just a bit. I mean, so at 2:30 in that day, Barbara and George were, according to the nail salon owner down the road, having a hell of a fight. They thought it actually gotten violent. Someone'd seen her, getting pushed around. They, basically taken her under the wing, and say, hey, well, you want to come in here and so forth. But needed to chill everything down. It was not looking good. About 4:30 that day, Michael, there were other employees working in the shop. About 4:30 that day, Michael just said, look, I'm going home. I'm going to go to my mom's house. I'm going to rest up and, see y'all later. And a bit after that, there was a very strange phone call that, according to Barbara's sister, came in. Someone inquiring about expensive comic books, but saying, I don't want to talk on the phone. I don't want. I will only talk in person. And it was just he was creepy enough about the whole thing that Barbara's sister reported that she was really unsettled by the whole conversation. It wasn't apparently like I've got a whole bunch of great Golden Age comic books. I want to give you a great deal on it. No, it was something creepier than that. And then about 5:30 that day, so 45 minutes before her body was found. About 5:30 that day, sister came by the store and it was locked, which wasn't that surprising because it had been known that she was going to go out to Hungry Howie's Pizza to get pizza for the party later on that day. And that was confirmed. So, the time frame was there's nobody in the store. The store was locked at 5:30 that day. And so I guess she must have come back afterwards and unlocked it, allowing a couple of teenagers and later on the Ward family to come in and later discover her, unfortunately. But there was a period of time when no one was in the store and the front door was locked. But right before 6 o'clock, a couple other employees that were, one employee, I'll get the name down the hole here. Again, so many players in this story. Well, I'm just going to have to move on right now until I find it. But there were a couple. Oh, sorry, Fred Hodgson and Joe Gray. Joe was a employee. I wasn't sure if it was of that store or a different one, but he was a comic guy. And Fred Hodgson, they were a couple of regulars. They had actually been reporting that hey, there's a shadowy character bouncing around the back here. And it had alarmed them. It was because it was ridiculous. They said it was a guy or maybe even a woman because it was a very slight figure wearing just a ridiculous disguise. It was like one of these big homeless beards with like the mustache and the whole works. And it looked so fake to them. They're like, this is not up to any kind of good. They went and they warned Barbara. They said, yeah, there's some guy skulking around the whole thing. Just kind of watch out for the whole thing. But, Fred had used to, work pizza for Domino's. And he decided, you know what, I'm going to tell the guys over at Hungry Howie's, watch out for this guy. Because last time something like this happened, the place got robbed. And it's a Friday night. There's a lot of money in the till right now. Let me just run around. Well, I'll check the rest of the strip mall out, but I also want to run over to the, Hungry Howie's and make sure that, they know to watch out for this kind of thing. Because this smells like, bad news to us. They wandered around the entire strip mall. They never actually encountered the homeless person or whoever this strange, character was again. And that was about it. And then the next weird thing that happened, because there were a lot of weird things that happened that day, is right as Tom and Lenora were pulling up to the store, they said there was what they described as a dark Monte Carlo that just was speeding by really fast. And Tom thought it was a guy in a hat of some sort driving the whole thing. But he also said that there was a guy in a different hat. He described it as a Greek sailor's cap coming out of the door right as they were walking into the shop. And so they thought, well, I don't know what the story with that all is. But as it turns out, people asked around. They asked the police. No one ever was able to identify either the car or the guy in this, in the Greek fishing hat, or for that matter, the weird looking character, whether it was a man, a woman, or whoever else, but the slight built character in the ridiculous beard costume, right around the time. And next thing they knew, they're looking at a dead body. So that was all very, very strange. But you've got the whole mystery. You've got missing comic books. You've got a dead body. You've got a suspicious-looking husband who looks like he might have been playing around. But you know what you don't have? Evidence. Not a damn bit of it. Everyone's got their suspicions, but no one can prove a thing. And unfortunately, at the time, whatever reason, they hadn't thought to take what they call a GSR, a gunshot residue test. It's where basically they put paraffin on your hand, where it detects that you've had bits of nitrate pressed into your flesh through the expellation of the gases that come when you fire a gun. It tells you whether or not you fired a gun recently. They did not think to perform such a test on Michael or anyone else at the time, and as a result, as soon as you go home and take a couple showers, there's no point doing it anymore because that's gone. There's no physical evidence. There's no signs of any kind of break-in. It looks like whoever got in, if they got in through the back, no one saw anyone go in through the front. Drawer had been locked shortly before then. Right before then, Barbara had unlocked it herself apparently and occupied it until the time of her death. They determined that she was kneeling down and she was shot execution style. But beyond that, there was not a darn thing to tie the murder to anyone. No gun was ever found. They canvassed the area. They searched dumpsters. They never found anything else except the one strange bullet that had been fired through the wall. And that was pretty much the end of the thing. And the case went cold. You can have suspicions, but suspicions aren't enough. You need to be able to prove it in a court. So time went by. The police chief eventually retired. 17 years, as a matter of fact, went by. And a new prosecutor came to town, new police chief came to town, and they decided, Clinton Township, we're growing. We're getting a little bit more money, and these old cases are bugging us. We had a lot of excitement around the case at the time, but nothing ever turned up. But I think we want to go back and have another look. So the new head went and said, okay, we're going to start a whole cold case division, and let's see how many of these old cases we can crack. And they managed to actually crack a couple right away, different things. And then they decided we're going to reopen the George murder case. And so they went, and again, it's not CSI. It's no easy way. There's no computer searches. There's nothing you can do to automate this stuff. It was a bunch of shoe leather. You're just assigning beat cops to go in there and knock on doors, re-interview witnesses, go through boxes of old moldy stuff, re-look at things. And pretty soon they noticed something extraordinary. There was a phone call that someone actually logged, a guy named Mike Renaud. He was working at a comic store, and he had talked about calling them to talk about why the sudden increase in the value of Spider-Man that he had. And he thinks that he talked to Mike, who he knew very well, at 5:30 that night. Not sleeping at home in his mom's place, but 5:30 on the shop phone number. And it wasn't a cell phone, it was the shop's phone. And that was very, very different than the timeline that they had previously had. Now, I want to introduce a couple of the other characters here because I took the time to look them up. And first of all, let's give you an idea of what the folks in this whole thing looked like. So here's your typical 1980s wedding picture of the happy couple back in better days. This is Mike and Barbara. And here is the new... as it turns out, Barbara had put on some weight. She'd, given birthday to the, couple's two children. And it turns out that Renee, the person who in the, time after her death seemed to be replacing her, looked like this. Yeah, and was looking quite a bit better. Well, going back to Mike Renault, Mike had worked at a department store at the time, and he remembered that, yeah, my coworker just clocked in, and they managed to actually find the time card, and the time card said that it was at 4:53 p.m. that that he had gone in there, and he said, "Yeah, I did on my break. My break was between 5:15 and 5:45, so yeah, that's when I went and I called the comic store because I wanted to know what had happened with the price of a comic book that there's a new a Spider-Man comic I owned that has just gone way up in value, and it's funny because I'm a comic guy and I have to know. It's like, what issue was it that he was even talking about? It's just, this is the sort of thing that bugs me. Now remember, comic Spider-Man 338 had just come out, finishing the Sinister Six. But just if you go down ComicBase and you look at Spider-Man at the time, this was the 90s. Marvel had a couple, three characters on their hands that were going gangbusters, and they couldn't put them in enough comics. So you had Ghost Rider, Wolverine, and yes, Venom in about every fifth comic book that Marvel was publishing at the time, and sometimes you had Ghost Rider and Venom and Wolverine, because that would really spike the sales. But anyway, with ComicBase, with issue 338 having just hit the stands, I'm guessing the comic book he's wondering about is this one right here. Amazing Spider-Man number 300. It's barely, not even 3 years old, and it's starting to go through the roof as far as its value goes. I believe it's currently going for about $4.50 in ComicBase. I think it's $1.50 comic book or thereabouts. But this is the first appearance of Venom as Eddie Brock. This is when it really kind of kicked into gear. But hey, maybe it wasn't this one. Maybe it was the one that came out just a couple months earlier. With Venom returning again. With the whole thing. Like I say, they couldn't get enough of that Venom. But anyway, Mike had called, and he wanted to know, hey, tell me, what is the deal with this? Renault had called, and he wanted to know what's the deal with this copy of Spider-Man. And Mike apparently was a very talkative guy. I mean, he knew him very well. He would hang up the comic shop all the time, and Mike usually always had the time to do the bullshit, just say, hey, how's it going, blah blah blah, what do you think about this, that, and the other thing. But Mike was in a hurry that day. He called him up, he wanted to ask about the value change and everything, and the guy would be like, I gotta go. Yes, he was just on and off the phone in no time flat, and it struck Renault as being kind of unusual for Mike. But anyway, so he noted it, and a detective at the time, back in 1990, had noted that, yeah, some guy named Renault called, and he said he talked to Mike at around 5:30, and somehow the police just filed it. They didn't put two and two together. They didn't realize that really kind of punches a hole in the entire time frame of the whole thing, and they just kind of let it go. But now that they've reinvestigated the case, now that the cold case squad's going at it, they say, we got something here. And other things that happened at that point. Remember, 17 years have gone by. During those 17 years, the case is getting cold. 2 years afterwards, Mike George had gotten the insurance payout. Interesting fact about Mike George: before he was into comic books, Mike used to sell insurance. And one of the things that he used to do when he was selling insurance, customers, when they laughed about it at the time, but they wound up testifying about it later. He was selling life insurance to one guy, and he says, "Yeah, I'm gonna sell you $130,000 policy. It's the same policy I got on my wife." Because the guy's saying, "Why so much?" And he says, "Well, it's the same amount I took out on my wife, so obviously I care," which is really interesting because Mike, as a later time comic guy, not as an insurance guy at that point, had just let his own $50,000 policy on himself lapse. He only had $30,000 out on himself, which was unusual because he was also the breadwinner. But nevertheless, he had a $130,000 policy on himself, which, when I looked it up in the inflation calculator, means that it was worth about $314,000 in 2024 bucks. So that's a pretty good amount on a 30 or 2-year-old woman. Add that to the insurance settlement he got on the $12,600 worth of stolen comic books, and he was $141,000 to in terms of checks had arrived at his place. And then he and his girlfriend, which then later became his wife, Renee, yes, the lovely comic shop assistant, had decided, yeah, we want to go and leave town. It's too many memories. We got to get out of here. And I think we're going to set up a place in a place called Winburn, Pennsylvania, just outside of Pittsburgh. It's where his new girlfriend or new wife, Renee, had family, and they opened up, yes, another comics world in Winburn, Pennsylvania. So they'd done pretty well for themselves, out there. They got a new set of shops going. The kids were, the two kids were growing. They didn't really talk much to people from the old town anymore. No one from the old town ever even saw the two daughters. But they'd gone in, and eventually, Michael had decided, I'm going to start a new, venture in addition to the comic shops. I'm going to start the Pittsburgh Comic Convention. He was the founder of that entire venture, which was a very successful, comic, show that ran throughout the Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh area. Much beloved by fans. People have nothing but nice things to say about it. It was just a hotel show, but it was a 3-day show, ran very well. We'll get to the end of that story in a bit, but anyway, so he's sitting there doing his best. Life has gone by, and meanwhile, back in Michigan, in the little town of Clinton, Clinton Township, the cold case guys are sitting there smelling blood, and they decide they're going to take their people and they're going to stage like a 3-part. Not really a raid. They don't have that kind of authority. It's cross state lines. But we're going to arrange for people to interview 3 people pretty much exactly at the same time. We want one detective to go and talk to Mike. We want another detective to talk to Renee. And we want a third detective to talk to his mom. Now, they kind of wait outside the store for the last customer to leave, and they're timing the thing down to the minute, and they notice Mike's on the phone talking to somebody, and the thing he says is that, no, they're here now. And he hangs up, and he's like, what can I do for you, gentlemen? Meanwhile, the other detective had been talking to Renee, who obviously had been calling Mike, and someone else had been talking to his mom. Well, the detective talking to Mike says, well, hey, about that business from all those years ago, I just want to ask you a few questions, do it Columbo style and the whole thing. And when they interviewed him again, now 17 years have gone by, and the guy's remarried. He's got a different perspective on the thing. But he's like, yeah, as it turns out, me and my wife, we weren't happy. What I told you at the time, not so much. Matter of fact, we'd had a bunch of fights, and yes, I'll admit I was even seeing Renee before then. And man, even now that we get down to it, she wasn't even the only one. As it would come out later in court testimony, more on that in just a second, there was another woman, at least one, in addition to the women he was chatting up at the funeral parlor, a woman named Patrice, who, let's see if I can find it. Oh, yes. Patrice was a lovely woman who thought, since Mike was living on his own at the time, he had a sort of a scantily furnished apartment on his own. He thought that he was separated from his wife. He didn't know that they were still a thing. But she had an affair with Patrice Sartori. She ended it right as Barbara was giving birth to their second child, like literally in the hospital, and decided that it was time for her to get out of Dodge. But she stuck into it a little longer than she would have otherwise. As it turns out, in court testimony, they have preliminary judgments about evidence. And one of the preliminary judgments about evidence was they were arguing, the prosecutor of the case, because it was soon to be a murder case, was saying, yes, we have testimony that Patrice was being blackmailed into keeping the affair going because Michael had filmed the two of them having sex and said, I'm going to show the tapes to your coworkers if you don't keep going with me. Eventually, when she's having, when his wife is having their second child, she decided, to hell with it, we're done anyway. And then later on, Renee entered the picture. But this testimony was considered prejudicial, and it was not allowed into court. Although, strangely enough, the evidence of that you can read, in the court documents afterwards about it not being allowed is a part of the public record that you can read today. Funny legal system we've got going here. Anyway, so these clearly been sleeping around. Yeah, he admitted it. He said, "Look, I've done a lot of bad things in my life, but I didn't kill my wife." And they said, "Well, okay, tell me about some of this other stuff that's going on. Tell us about the insurance policy. Tell us about the comics. By the way, we've talked to a lot of other people, and nobody else remembers you having all those comics. Matter of fact, nobody's ever seen them, including complete comic nerds who worked in your shop. And he had the story to tell about the whole thing, but it wasn't considered particularly persuasive. And in the end, they decided, look, there's enough here that we're going to file charges. And they took him in, and they seated a jury, and he's on trial for his life now. Now it's the year 2008. And when we went into the whole thing, we basically came down to a matter of the whole timeline. And it kind of comes down to one of two things happened. Now, in Michael's version of events, and remember, the defense doesn't have to publish, they don't have to have a testimony of how things went down. They don't have to solve the crime themselves. Matter of fact, this whole Nancy Drew, sleuthing on your own kind of thing. The brother of the slain woman actually tried it themselves. It did not end like a TV show. They found no wonderful evidence on the whole thing. Everyone had a theory, but again, no one had proof. But the defense doesn't have to say this is how it happened. But they did certainly have ideas of how it might have happened differently than how the prosecutor thought it happened. Let's first of all talk about how the defense thinks it might have happened. They said, look, it was clearly a robbery gone wrong, or maybe it wasn't. On the second go around when they went to interview him, they thought, well, everyone loved Barbara. It's probably someone who hated me. It was I pissed off a lot of people in my life. Maybe it was probably revenge. Maybe it wasn't robbery after all. The detective was surprised because that was a change in what the defendant, or the now defendant thought the motive was. The suspect thought the motive was the whole thing, but he went along with it. But according to their version of events, someone was out to get to get Michael, and unfortunately they just Barbara was just in the wrong place, wrong time. Another theory possibly is that, well, maybe have you looked at my new wife's ex, because some people think, hey, you took my wife, I'll take yours, right? Maybe he was out for blood. I'm to get the whole thing. But the idea is that someone had been lurking in the store. And Michael was peacefully sleeping at home, and they just did in his wife, and who can say no about the whole thing? They came time to present the testimony in the court and everything. The defense actually put out a couple of good alternate theories of the whole thing and say, look, what about the speeding car? What about the dude in the Greek fishing hat? For that matter, what the heck's wrong with you guys that you didn't investigate a similar murder that happened in Michigan right around that time, where a guy had been stealing comic books and also committed murder? Now, he didn't actually murder to get the comic books, but they said, hey, what about that guy? And they went to look for him, but the guy had absconded. He's still on the loose. He's clearly a comic-crazed murderer. Why aren't you looking at that guy? Why are you hassling my client? This poor guy has lost his wife, trying to put his life together, and you're ignoring everything. You're ignoring the strange bearded guy. You're ignoring the strange guy in the fishing hat. Murderers on the loose, etc. Why are you hassling my guy? And again, what evidence do you have? For that matter, his own mother, people, testifies that he left, everyone knows he left the shop at 4:30. He lives in a township that's about 30 minutes away, so for him to have gotten to the store at any time before 6:15 and murder his wife and been back, his mom says, look, he got to my place. I left him about 5:30. He was lying on the couch. I took the kids to the park around 5:30, and when I came back, sometime after 6, he was on the couch sleeping. Matter of fact, his own daughter has a vague memory that she testified to 17 years later. It's like, yeah, I kind of remember he was sleeping on his side. So because that's a memory, and so his very own mom and his daughter are saying, hey, he's innocent. We've got him here definitely during the time he couldn't possibly have done it. But then there's that damn phone call. It's the one where the guy had called about the price of the Spider-Man. And when the jury looked at the whole thing after everything was said and done, they said, look, he's a womanizing guy. We know he's a jerk, but we can't convict him of just being a bad womanizer. I mean, you're not guilty of having affairs. you're guilty of killing your wife or you're not. And the initial vote was something like 7-5, in favor of guilt. 5 people were holding out, but bit by bit, they kept going back, and as they kept on going back to that whole time frame where they knew the door was locked at 5:30, everybody admitted it, including the defense witnesses, and they knew that at 5:30 or thereabouts, give or take 15 minutes, one direction or another, because of when Renault's break was at the department store and because of the punched-in time slip, they said, well, we know he picked up the phone in the shop at that time. It wasn't like there was cell phone forwarding at the time. And so we think what was really happening is not that a shadowing guy looking for revenge was hiding out in the back or anything else like that. No, we think that what really happened is he pretended to go to his mom's house, maybe even was at his mom's house for a little bit, but then he came back to the shop, let himself in with his own key through the back door, laid in wait, and when his wife came back from inquiring about his birthday, dinner at Hungry Howie's, he went in the back and he shot her execution style with a small caliber gun. They think it's a .38 special. Everyone thinks that the hole in the calendar and the hole in her head were both a .38. And some other tests that they did at the time where they said, well, we know that it would penetrate the walls going through the sheetrock, but not much further, really. It's not a very, 30, it's not a very big round. It's not a huge slug. Like I say, it's this size. This is actually a 9mm. But yeah, they very, very similar. Fired into the skull, especially from above. That's the last you will see of that bullet. But more importantly, no one heard any shots. And the thought at trial was that the first shot into the calendar was there to find out whether anyone would hear a shot from an adjoining suite. And it seems that no one ever did. They're not making any kind of bold claims about silencers. Like I say, no one ever found the gun. Later on, there was talk that, possibly a friend had loaned things like that, but nothing was ever proved. So no one, again, no physical evidence of that sort, no DNA, nothing like that. But the thought is that, yes, he lied in wait, shot his wife, scooted out the back, and possibly, he might have been wearing a disguise. He might have been the guy in the Greek hat wearing a fake mustache or some nonsense like that. He could have even, some thought, have been aided by Renee, as the slightly built woman in the preposterous disguise dressed as a hobo might have actually been a getaway driver. That might have been a thing. They don't know, but they didn't really tie up that end of the whole thing. But when they all came down to it, the jury looked at the whole thing, and eventually the jury verdict became unanimous, and they convicted him of first-degree murder. They sentenced him to life without any kind of life in jail, without any possibility of parole. But then the story didn't end there, because in order to get to the end of the whole thing, turns out whenever you get a heavy murder sentence, you get an appeal. And part of his appeal was they said, well, look, you did sloppy police work, which is understandable, but they also said there was something improper about the idea that you were insinuating that Renee was the bearded man. Again, it's unclear how. I don't have the exact parts of the court proceeding or the ruling on the appeal, which insinuated how that was a bad thing or whatever else. I'm not a lawyer myself, but that was enough to get him a new trial. And so in 2011, he got a new trial, and he got convicted again. So at the end of 2011, he'd been convicted twice of the same murder. Yes, Department of Commerce is saying, Kathy Ireland. Sorry, getting distracted there. So and he's currently serving again life in prison without possibility of parole up in the state correctional facility. So just a couple ends to the whole thing. Technically, what he was convicted of was a combination of murder, possession of a firearm that he shouldn't have had, insurance fraud to the tune of $140,000, and so forth. Let's pull up a look at where he's at today. Here we are. Let me switch over to the PC. This is Michael Ralph George. I will confess, since by this point in the story, young Pete Bickford had released several versions of ComicBase, again, 17 years later. ComicBase launched in 1992. And I thought, well, I know a lot of people who are in the comic business whole thing. do I have any Michael Georges in my database around that area? And I, as it turns out, I do. But it's not the same guy. So anyway, but this is Michael Ralph George, prisoner number 684257. Currently doing time, as they say. But yes, he's actually in for murder in the first, premeditated, again, felony firearms and so forth. There's the inactive portion of his sentence. In other words, he's already effectively served the time on these ones, is the obtaining money over the amount of $100 under false pretenses and the insurance fraud. So I guess if they somehow let go the part of his conviction that's due to the murder, then I guess he's good to go. But yes, ironically, the sentence for the felony firearms and the the homicide, those ones he's either serving consecutively or whatever else. But yeah, he's still up for both of those. So yeah, it looks like he's going to be out basically never on those ones. So that's what he's doing right now. His wife obviously is in the ground. There was some interesting talk during testimony when they talked to the children, and they were trying to say whether or not, whether my father couldn't have done it. He always doted on his, our mom and so forth. The prosecutor is saying that he neglected the grave, and I'm here to tell you that no, he went there every week and so forth. I mean, there was actually some of the testimony that I read over. They made a big point of mentioning that how faithful he was to keeping the grave up. So there's that. Renee still going. She's a decent looking woman at this point. She's as the prosecutors would have said, the newer, thinner model, but still going, still associated with Pittsburgh Comic-Con. Pittsburgh Comic-Con, meanwhile, it had a good run. It got started by Mike George. I think I've got a picture of this somewhere. Let me pop that on. So again, started out as a hotel show, but very, very well regarded. In 2001, interesting fun things that went on with it. Frank Miller they used to host the Harvey Awards there. By the way, ComicBase was one point up for a Harvey Award, but they used to they host the Harvey Awards up there. And in 2001, Frank Miller had been reacting to a new magazine on the scene called Wizard Magazine, and he's saying, "Look, I want to get the quote right, so let me make sure I get this." He's referred to Wizard Magazine as a, quote, Bible written by Satan. He referred to it as the industry's being responsible for the industry's slump, and referred to this as a tree killer of a magazine. And, quote, even though this monthly vulgarity reinforces all the prejudice people hold about comics, they cry to all the world that we're as cheap and stupid and trashy as they think we are. We sponsor the assault, Frank Miller said. And then to sort of send it home, he ripped a copy of Wizard Magazine up on stage and threw it in the trash bin. So that was fun. Frank's always been pretty based. He's a good guy. We've interviewed him. But anyway, that's the thing. In 2009, it kept going under the regular management until about 2009. 2015, it got bought by Wizard. Became part of their convention schedule. But then let me get the date on this exactly. As of 2019, it looks like it's all game over. The site would redirect to, I believe, Steel City something or other, and but the Pittsburgh Comic-Con is no more with it. Now, ironically, you might say, well, whatever happened to Comics World? Oh, by the way, nobody ever found the lost comics. They were never CGC'd. They were never locked into something that would make them identifiable in any way. And certainly no one reported having gotten a really good deal on a bunch of old comic books in the area. So whether they were even stolen in the first place remains a matter of mystery. There are people who lined up on both sides of that one, but no evidence really was ever produced on those ones to say that he even had them. But lastly, this one is Comics World, the new shop he opened up. Let me get over to the right place. Is actually still going. I don't know what the management is. I mean, it might be it's still in the family. Maybe it's been sold off. Don't know. But the store's still going. And according to the folks on Facebook and all the local reviews, they say it's a good place. It's actually a very well regarded store. So if you're in the area, it sounds like you could do a lot worse than come by and stop and check out the store. So that's a thing. Anyway, so that's pretty much the end of the story, except for one thing. In 2013, they were doing some cleaning in the store in the back room. They'd replaced the water heater a couple times before. But anyway, they're moving things around, and they think they maybe knocked a ceiling tile, is the current, that's what the property owner thinks. And they found a tarnished thing that they hadn't seen before in all this time. It was one of these. It was a 9mm unfired bullet. Now, if you guys remember the story very well, you'll recall that the police were pretty sure that the bullets that were fired into the wall and the calendar were 38s, not 9mm. But, because it's kind of a firearm geek sort of thing, wanted to see if I could find the relevant part over here. Give me just a second to pull that up. I had this all bookmarked, and now I have to find it up right now. Here we are. So a 38 is not the same as a 9mm, but they're not very different. It turns out, now most people when they think about firearms, they're thinking about the overall size of the cartridge when they say the bullet. The bullet is actually the little part up here. It's the little piece of lead. The stuff down here is the gunpowder and the primer. It's, so you basically hit the part at the bottom. It makes it's usually a little squib of RDX. It's a high explosive of all things, but just like a cap gun's worth, which then sets on fire a bunch of gunpowder, which then sends the pressure in this little case. It's called the cartridge, or the casing. The cartridge is the whole thing put together, but the casing over here, this is a brass jacket, then sends this little bullet, this little part at the end, which only crimps into the case about this far. It turns out that that is what goes downrange and makes the hole in whatever it's pointed at. Well, so you've got the 38s over here, you've got the 9mm over here, but pay special attention to just the top, because that's the bullet, right? Well, it turns out if you look at a 38 versus a 9mm, the actual bullet diameter of a 38 special, this is what the cops thought had been shot into the wall. But remember, they're looking at the fragments, because these things, when they hit the wall, they deform slightly. Those are 3.357, right? You might have heard that one. It's just, very typical measurements. It's one of these iconic numbers in guns. And the 9mm is 0.355. They are 2/1000ths of an inch different from each other. For all practical purposes, they're identical. But anyway, as it turns out, it's just an unfired cartridge. Could have happened anywhere. Found it in the back room. And the prosecutor says it means nothing. So there you have it. Guess it's the case closed. Anyway, that's our story for today. That was the comic book murder. Do want to say one last thing, though, before we get going. It's Halloween tomorrow. Hope you're all having a great time with it. If you got kids, I hope you have a wonderful time dressing up, trick-or-treating, being spooky, going to parties, whatever you're doing, enjoy the holiday. It's a wonderful thing. We'll be sitting at home. I guess we're getting a lot of rain in the area, so we don't get a lot of trick-or-treaters these days. For some reason, the kids have all moved on to the apartment blocks nearby because a lot less hoofing around in order to get your candy. So we don't get a lot of trick-or-treaters anymore. So probably me and the wife will be sitting around, watching scary movies and stuff like that. So it'll be pretty quiet night over at the Bickford household. But I do want to say, before we meet next time, there will be another, if you're American, another scary thing that happens between now and then. And obviously, like, this is not a political show. It's not even normally a true crime show. But I did have one thought, about the whole thing. Well, I had two thoughts. One is this is interesting. It's the first time in my life that there's really no mystery whatsoever about what you're getting when you vote in the election. It's the first time I can never think of where it's essentially two incumbents running against each other. And it really comes down to like, well, if you like the way things have been going the last 4 years, you can vote for that. And if you like the way it was going 4 years before that, you can vote for that. And it's clear as they're both on the ticket. Really, no one's promising anything different. So make your choices, and God bless, and good luck to you. But I will say, it's funny. I was out in Virginia, and the level of angst out on the streets with yard signs and accusatory messages back and forth is really, really high. I was driving past I was going out to visit a friend, and there were people who were literally, they were being vulgar with their own yard signs, attacking their neighbors, attacking each other. And I guess I just advise you, it's like, look, at the end of the day, we got to find a way to live with each other. We're all neighbors here. So, I'm going to say maybe dial it down, but more importantly, when the day's over, win or lose, peel the bumper sticker off, take down the yard sign. I'm not asking you to believe anything you believe any less strongly than you believed it the day before, but find a way to deal with your neighbor like they're a human being. Certainly argue your ideas. I always believe in arguing your ideas, as you want, but don't argue the people. Don't say the other guy is a bad guy because they voted for the other guy. And I'm also going to say, in particular, to the winners, whoever wins, if your guy wins or the other guy's wins, if your guy wins, be nice to the guy who lost. You might be feeling like, "Ha, I've got you now. It's it's victory, it's sweet, it's revenge, it's whatever it is," right? Don't do it. Be nice. Be sweet to the guy whose team lost on this one. Think about it like when you were playing baseball, right? When at the end of the game, y'all, win or lose, it could be a hard-fought battle, but y'all went and shook the other team's hand, and then I'm sure my T-ball league or whatever else, you all went out and got dilly bars from Dairy Queen. But anyway, it's the part at the end of the day where we all shake each other's hands and go home, and we'll play again another day. We got to have that again. Because look, even if you're just looking at it is just purely selfishly for yourself, the next time out, you're going to want that guy, even if they voted the other way you did on this thing, you're going to want to win them around to your way of thinking, right? And you're not going to do that by lording it over them or rubbing their nose in it. You're going to get them to come around to your way of thinking by convincing them, hey, man, I saw it one way, you saw it the other way, but let me show you why my way is better, but let me bring you along on the whole thing because I care about you as a neighbor. They're not going to be along with you on that journey if you're just looking to like rub it, lord it over them. So that's my advice. Anyway, go do your best, and may we all see each other on the other side as friends. Till next Wednesday, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.